You started intermittent fasting 3 months ago with enormous hope. You had read the articles, watched the videos, heard the success stories from people who seemed to melt fat effortlessly by simply rearranging when they ate. The logic was compelling. The science seemed sound. You committed fully, skipping breakfast, pushing your first meal later and later, feeling the hunger pangs and accepting them as evidence that something was working. And for the first few weeks, something was working. The scale moved. Your pants fit differently. You felt sharper in the mornings, more energetic during your fasting hours than you had ever felt during your old breakfast, lunch, dinner routine. You told friends about your discovery. You became an advocate for this approach that seemed to be transforming your body without requiring you to count calories or eliminate foods you loved. Then the progress stopped. The scale stabilized, which you accepted as normal. Plateaus happen. You continued with the same discipline, the same schedule, the same commitment. But the scale did not just stabilize, it started creeping upward. A pound here, another pound there. Within a month you had regained what you lost and added more. You were fasting diligently, eating less frequently than ever before, and somehow gaining weight. This made no sense. Everything you understood about energy balance suggested that eating less frequently should produce weight loss, not weight gain. You wondered if something was wrong with your metabolism. You wondered if you were an exception to the rules that seemed to work for everyone else. You wondered if intermittent fasting was a fraud after all, just another diet fad that promised transformation and delivered disappointment. Here is what I need you to understand. Intermittent fasting works. The mechanisms are real. The benefits are documented. People genuinely transform their bodies and their metabolic health through strategic timing of food intake. But intermittent fasting is not a magic spell that produces results regardless of how it is implemented. Like any tool, it can be used effectively or ineffectively. Like any strategy, it can be optimized or undermined by factors that determine whether the approach achieves what it is capable of achieving. When people gain weight while practicing intermittent fasting, the problem is rarely with fasting itself. The problem is almost always with how fasting is being implemented, with mistakes that seem minor but that fundamentally change what the body experiences and how it responds. These mistakes are common because they are not obvious. People make them without realizing they are making them, then blame the approach rather than the implementation when results disappoint. I want to walk you through the most significant mistakes that cause weight gain during intermittent fasting. Not because I want to criticize how anyone has been doing this, but because identifying problems is the first step towards solving them. If you have been fasting without the results you expected, one or more of these mistakes is likely the explanation. Correcting them can restore the progress that stalled, can reverse the weight gain that confused you, can help you finally achieve what intermittent fasting is capable of providing. The first mistake that undermines fasting results involves rigid repetition of the same schedule day after day. This seems counterintuitive because consistency is usually praised as a virtue. You found a pattern that worked initially. You committed to that pattern with discipline. You followed the exact same schedule every single day because that is what discipline looks like, what commitment requires, what success demands. But your metabolism did not evolve to handle perfect predictability. The bodies we inhabit developed over millions of years in environments where food availability was anything but consistent. Some days our ancestors found abundant food, other days they found nothing. Sometimes feasts followed famines, sometimes scarcity extended for days before opportunity returned. The pattern was unpredictable, variable, constantly shifting in ways that no one could anticipate. This variability shaped how human metabolism operates. Your body is designed to adapt to changing conditions, to shift between burning stored fat and processing incoming food, to adjust hormone levels and energy allocation based on what circumstances seem to require. This metabolic flexibility is a survival adaptation. It allows humans to thrive under conditions that would starve less adaptable organisms. When you impose perfect consistency on a system designed for variability, adaptation occurs in ways that work against your goals. Your body learns the pattern, it anticipates the feeding window, it adjusts hormone release and metabolic rate to match what it has learned to expect. The initial disruption that made fasting effective, the metabolic surprise that stimulated fat burning and hormonal recalibration, fades as your body settles into treating the pattern as normal. Think of it like exercise. If you performed exactly the same workout at exactly the same intensity every single day, your body would adapt to that specific stimulus. The workout that initially challenged you would become routine. The adaptations that initially occurred would plateau. Progress would stall because the body had fully adjusted to the predictable demand. Metabolic adaptation to fasting follows similar principles. The 16-hour fast that initially stimulated metabolic change becomes the expected baseline. The body adjusts its expectations, its hormone release, its energy management to accommodate what it now treats as normal. The fat-burning advantage that variability provided diminishes as predictability teaches the body exactly what to expect and when. The solution is to vary your fasting schedule intentionally. Some days fast for 16 hours. Other days extend to 20 or 22 hours. Some days do not fast at all. Mix shorter eating windows with longer ones. Alternate more restrictive days with more relaxed days. Create the kind of unpredictability that mimics the conditions under which human metabolism evolved. This variation keeps your body guessing, prevents full adaptation to any single pattern, maintains the metabolic flexibility that makes fasting effective. You are not abandoning discipline, you are applying discipline more intelligently, varying the stimulus to prevent the adaptation that consistency produces. The second mistake involves fasting windows that never extend beyond moderate lengths. Many people find a comfortable pattern, perhaps 16 hours of fasting and 8 hours of eating, and remain there indefinitely. This duration works initially. Results appear. But when those results plateau, the response is often to continue the same pattern with greater strictness rather than to extend the fasting period itself. Short to moderate fasting windows produce benefits, but they access only a portion of what fasting can provide. The metabolic shifts that occur during fasting happen progressively, with different processes activating at different time points. Glycogen depletion occurs relatively quickly. Ketone production increases as fasting extends. Autophagy, the cellular cleaning process, accelerates during longer fasts. Growth hormone pulses become more pronounced. Fat oxidation intensifies. If you never extend beyond 16 hours, you're accessing the early benefits while missing the deeper metabolic effects that longer fasts can provide. This is not to say everyone should fast for extended periods regularly, but occasionally extending into longer fasting windows, perhaps 24 hours once a week or a longer fast once a month, can stimulate processes that shorter daily fasts do not fully activate. When weight loss stalls despite consistent moderate fasting, the plateau may indicate that your body has extracted what it can from that fasting duration and needs a different stimulus. Extending the fast, even occasionally, can provide that stimulus. It can restart fat burning that had slowed. It can deepen the metabolic effects that initial fasting provided. It can break through plateaus that seemed immovable. The caution here involves listening to your body and extending gradually rather than jumping immediately to extreme durations. If you've been doing 16-hour fasts, try 18 hours occasionally, then 20, then perhaps a full 24 hours when circumstances allow. Build capacity progressively, rather than forcing durations your body's not prepared for. The third mistake is perhaps the most common and the most damaging, assuming that fasting permits poor food quality during eating windows. This mistake reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how fasting works and what it can and cannot accomplish. Fasting is not permission to eat whatever you want during your eating window. The metabolic benefits of fasting can be negated, even reversed, by food choices that undermine what fasting is trying to achieve. If your eating window involves processed foods, inflammatory oils, refined carbohydrates, and chemical additives, you're working against the very processes that fasting is supposed to support. Let me be specific about the food quality issues that most commonly undermine fasting results. Highly processed vegetable oils and industrial seed oils represent one major category. These oils, extracted through chemical processes from seeds that would never yield oil through traditional pressing, contain fatty acid profiles that promote inflammation and disrupt cellular function. They appear in nearly all processed foods, in restaurant cooking, in products that seem healthy but are manufactured with cost efficiency rather than nutrition in mind. When you consume these oils during your eating window, you're introducing compounds that damage the very cellular processes that fasting is trying to repair. The inflammation they promote counteracts the anti-inflammatory effects of fasting. The oxidative stress they create overwhelms the antioxidant benefits that fasting provides. You fast diligently, then undo much of that work by eating foods made with oils that harm your cells. switching to traditional fats, those that humans have consumed for thousands of years, without the chronic diseases that characterize modern life, can dramatically change how your body responds to fasting. Olive oil, butter from pastured animals, coconut oil, animal fats from clean sources. These provide the fat your body needs without the inflammatory burden that industrial oils impose. Processed carbohydrates represent another category that undermines fasting results. Refined flour products, packaged snacks, sweetened beverages, items made with sugar, and stripped of the fiber and nutrients that whole foods contain. These foods spike blood sugar rapidly, demand insulin responses that promote fat storage, and create the metabolic dysfunction that fasting is supposed to address. If you fast for 16 hours and then break your fast with pastries and bread, with chips and crackers, with foods that send your blood sugar soaring and your insulin following, you are partially negating the hormonal benefits that fasting provided. Insulin is the storage hormone. When it spikes repeatedly, fat storage is promoted. The fat burning that occurred during your fast reverses as insulin rises to handle the processed carbohydrates you consumed. Whole food carbohydrates, those that come from vegetables and fruits and legumes and intact grains, produce different metabolic responses. The fiber slows absorption. The nutrients support cellular function. The overall effect on blood sugar and insulin is more modest and more manageable. Your body can handle carbohydrates when they come in their natural packaging, rather than stripped and refined into concentrated doses. Environmental toxins in food represent a less obvious but equally important consideration. Many processed foods contain artificial ingredients, preservatives, colorings, flavor enhancers, and other compounds that never existed in human diets until recent decades. These substances are approved as safe in the small quantities present in individual servings, but the cumulative exposure from consuming many such products daily can affect hormones and metabolic function. Some of these compounds have been identified as endocrine disruptors, substances that interfere with hormone signaling. When your hormones are disrupted, weight management becomes more difficult regardless of what else you do. The hormones that regulate hunger, satiety, fat storage, and energy expenditure operate through delicate signaling systems. Compounds that interfere with this signaling can make weight loss resistant to strategies that should work. Choosing whole foods, foods that do not come in packages with ingredient lists, foods that your great-grandparents would recognize as food, reduces exposure to these compounds. Clean proteins, vegetables, fruits, nuts, traditional fats, minimally processed whole foods of all kinds. This is what humans evolved eating. This is what human metabolism is designed to handle. This is the food quality that allows fasting to achieve its full potential. The hormonal dimension deserves explicit attention because it explains why food quality matters beyond simple caloric considerations. Insulin has received appropriate attention as a driver of fat storage. When insulin is elevated, your body prioritizes storage over burning. Fasting lowers insulin, which is part of why it promotes fat loss. But breaking your fast with foods that spike insulin undermines this benefit, creating a pattern where insulin is low during the fast and high during the eating window, which may not produce the overall hormonal environment that weight loss requires. Cortisol, the stress hormone, also affects fat storage, particularly around the midsection. Chronic stress, inadequate sleep, excessive caffeine, and other factors that elevate cortisol work against weight loss even when diet and fasting are otherwise on point. If you fast diligently but live in a state of chronic stress, the cortisol elevation may counteract the benefits that fasting would otherwise provide. Addressing the stress dimension, while beyond the scope of food quality, matters for fasting results. Sleep quality, stress management practices, lifestyle factors that affect cortisol all influence whether fasting achieves what it is capable of achieving. This is not to suggest that you cannot fast until your life is perfectly serene. It is to recognize that hormonal factors beyond insulin affect outcomes, and attending to these factors improves results. The fourth mistake involves neglecting the body's detoxification systems while focusing exclusively on when and what you eat. Fasting initiates cellular cleaning processes, mobilizes stored compounds including toxins stored in fat tissue, and generally accelerates turnover and elimination. But these processes depend on functioning elimination systems to complete the job. Your body eliminates waste through multiple pathways: kidneys producing urine, liver processing and excreting through bile, colon eliminating solid waste, skin sweating, lungs exhaling. When these pathways function well, the toxins and metabolic waste that fasting mobilizes are efficiently removed. When these pathways are sluggish or overwhelmed, mobilized toxins may recirculate rather than being eliminated, potentially causing symptoms and undermining metabolic function. Some people experience worsened symptoms when they begin fasting because they are mobilizing toxins faster than they are eliminating them. The fat cells that shrink during fasting release not only fatty acids, but also fat-soluble toxins that were stored in those cells. If elimination pathways cannot keep pace with this release, problems ensue. Supporting elimination is not complicated, but it is often overlooked. Adequate hydration supports kidney function. Fiber intake supports bowel regularity. Movement promotes lymphatic flow and sweating. Sleep supports the liver's nighttime detoxification processes. These basic practices, which might seem unrelated to fasting, actually determine whether fasting can proceed effectively. If you fast diligently but are chronically dehydrated, constipated, sedentary, and sleep-deprived, your elimination systems are not functioning at the level that fasting requires. The toxins and waste products that fasting mobilizes have nowhere to go. They recirculate, creating symptoms and potentially signaling the body to slow down the very processes you're trying to accelerate. Ensuring that elimination pathways are open and functioning before and during fasting allows the mobilized waste to exit the body efficiently. Drink adequate water, eat fiber during your eating window, move your body regularly, sleep enough for your liver to complete its cycles. These practices are not optional extras. They are prerequisites for fasting to work as intended. The fifth mistake is never taking a break from fasting, treating it as a permanent state rather than a practice that benefits from periodic interruption. This mistake relates to the adaptation problem I described earlier, but extends beyond simple schedule variation. Sometimes the body needs a complete break from fasting itself, a period where normal eating patterns resume before fasting is reintroduced. People who practice aggressive fasting patterns, eating only once a day for extended periods, are particularly susceptible to this problem. The body adapts to even variable fasting schedules if they continue indefinitely. Metabolic rate can decline. Hormones can adjust in ways that resist further fat loss. The body essentially accepts the reduced food availability as the new normal and adjusts its energy expenditure accordingly. Taking a strategic break, perhaps a week or two of normal eating patterns without any fasting, can reset these adaptations. The body receives the signal that food is abundant again. Metabolic rate may recover, hormones may readjust. When fasting resumes after this break, the body responds as if to a new stimulus, rather than continuing the adapted state that had developed. This concept parallels the diet breaks that are sometimes recommended during extended caloric restriction. Constant restriction leads to adaptation. Brief periods of normal eating interrupt this adaptation and allow subsequent restriction to work more effectively. The same principle applies to fasting. Constant fasting, even with schedule variation, eventually produces adaptation. Strategic breaks interrupt this adaptation and restore responsiveness. The timing and duration of breaks varies by individual. Someone who has been fasting aggressively for months might benefit from a longer break than someone who has been doing moderate fasting for a shorter period. The key is recognizing that fasting need not be a permanent, uninterrupted practice to be effective. Periodic breaks can actually enhance long-term results by preventing the adaptation that continuous fasting produces. This insight reframes intermittent fasting from a rigid protocol to a flexible practice. You're not committed to fasting every day for the rest of your life. You're using fasting as a tool when it serves you, taking breaks when breaks serve you, adjusting your approach based on how your body responds rather than adhering to fixed rules regardless of outcomes. The personalization that effective fasting requires cannot be overstated. What works for one person may not work for another. The fasting schedule that produces results for your friend may be wrong for your metabolism. The food choices that support one person's fasting practice may undermine another's. There is no universal protocol that everyone should follow regardless of individual circumstances. This variability frustrates people who want simple, universal rules. They want to be told exactly what to do, exactly when to eat, exactly what to avoid. They want a protocol they can follow mechanically without having to observe their own responses and adjust accordingly. But this mechanical approach fails because human metabolisms are not mechanical. They're complex adaptive systems that respond differently to the same inputs based on genetics, history, stress, sleep, hormones, and countless other factors. Effective fasting requires paying attention to your body, to what works and what does not work for you specifically. It requires willingness to adjust based on results, rather than adhering to protocols that are not producing outcomes. It requires humility about what you know, and openness to trying different approaches when current approaches are not working. Some people thrive on longer fasts, others do better with shorter, more frequent eating windows. Some need more fat in their diet to sustain fasting comfortably. Others handle carbohydrates better than conventional fasting wisdom suggests. Some need to be very strict about food quality. Others have more metabolic flexibility. The variations are endless, and discovering what works for you requires experimentation and observation rather than blind adherence to generic advice. The practices I have described for avoiding common mistakes, varying your schedule, occasionally extending fasts, improving food quality, supporting elimination, taking strategic breaks, are not rigid prescriptions. They are directions to explore. You might find that schedule variation is crucial for you while food quality matters less than expected. You might find that extended fasts do not suit your body, but strategic breaks are transformative. The goal is not to follow rules perfectly, but to understand principles and apply them in ways that work for your situation. I want to be clear about what this means for anyone who's been struggling with weight gain during fasting. The struggle does not mean fasting has failed you or that you are incapable of success. It almost certainly means that something about your implementation needs adjustment. One of the mistakes I have described, or perhaps a combination of them, is likely preventing the results you should be getting. This is encouraging news because mistakes can be corrected. If your schedule has been rigidly consistent, vary it. If your fasts have been stuck at moderate durations, occasionally extend them. If your food quality has been poor, improve it. If your elimination has been sluggish, support it. If you have been fasting continuously for months, take a break. These are actionable adjustments that can change your results. The weight gain that confused you has an explanation. The body that seemed to defy logic is actually following logic perfectly, responding to the specific conditions you have been creating even if you did not realize you were creating them. Change those conditions and the response changes. The same body that gained weight under one implementation of fasting can lose weight under a different implementation. This perspective shifts you from victim to agent. You're not a helpless subject of metabolic dysfunction beyond your control. You are someone who has been using a tool in a way that produced unintended results, and who can now use that tool differently to produce different results. The tool works. The question is only how to use it effectively for your specific situation. I've seen people who are ready to give up on fasting entirely, make adjustments, and finally achieve the results that had eluded them. The frustration of months of apparent failure transformed into progress once the specific mistake was identified and corrected. Sometimes it was food quality all along. Sometimes it was rigid scheduling. Sometimes it was not supporting elimination during aggressive fasting. The specific cause varied, but the pattern was consistent. Something was undermining results, and addressing it restored progress. The community of people practicing intermittent fasting includes individuals at every stage of this journey. Some are just beginning, full of hope and anticipation. Some have been practicing successfully for years, having discovered what works for them. Some have struggled, plateaued, even gained weight, and have either given up in frustration or are searching for answers. If you have been struggling, know that others have struggled before you and have found solutions. The answers exist. The path forward exists. The adjustment that will unlock your results exists. Take stock of your current practice. Be honest about where the mistakes I have described might apply to your situation. Consider which adjustments might address your specific circumstances. Then implement those adjustments with the same commitment you have brought to fasting itself. Give the adjustments time to work. Observe results. Adjust further if needed. This is not a one-time fix, but an ongoing process of refinement. Intermittent fasting is one of the most powerful tools available for metabolic health, for weight management, for hormone regulation, for cellular repair, for longevity. These benefits are not theoretical. They are experienced by millions of people who have discovered how to implement fasting effectively for their individual situations. The same benefits are available to you once you identify and correct whatever has been undermining your results. Weight gain during fasting is not evidence that fasting does not work. It is evidence that something about the implementation needs to change. You now know what the common mistakes are. You now know how to correct them. What remains is to apply this knowledge to your specific situation and discover what your body has been waiting for all along. The results you hoped for when you began fasting are still available. They were always available. Something was just blocking the path. Now you have a clearer view of what that something might be. Clear it away and watch what happens when fasting finally works the way it was always supposed to work.